Ethan Ross awoke to silence, the kind that was so absolute it thrummed through his bones, reverberating in the space between his heartbeats. He blinked, eyes struggling to adjust, but his surroundings remained an enigma. His hands, trembling as he pushed against the cold surface beneath him, touched something smooth, too unnatural. It wasn't the metal or the sterile white of a spacecraft he knew, but something alive, almost pulsing. Where am I? His mind fumbled through fragments of memory, but they were clouded, shifting like smoke before his eyes. The last clear thought that flashed through his mind was the face of a woman. A face with skin so smooth it resembled translucent glass, with eyes that gleamed like emeralds in the dim light. She'd spoken to him, her words soft but layered with command. But then, nothing. He sat up, instinctively brushing his hands over his face, only to realize that his vision was still blurry, his head pounding as though he'd been hit by a wave of static. His body felt strangely weightless, as if gravity had forgotten him. As his vision cleared, he saw that he was lying on an organic-looking bed, or was it a table? The material seemed to breathe beneath him, a soft ripple of energy flowing through its surface as though it was alive, conscious even. The room around him was dark, save for an eerie glow that pulsed softly from the walls. No windows, no visible doors, just undulating dark shapes that gave no clue to his location. A low hiss echoed from the corner of the room. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He turned, but before he could make sense of the form standing in the shadowed alcove, it moved, gliding toward him with an elegance that was far too precise, too smooth to be human. The figure came into the dim light, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. A woman, but not just any woman. She towered over him, her height and posture reminding him more of a queen than any human he had known. Her skin shimmered, reflecting the dull light in rainbow hues, like the surface of a crystal in the sun. Her face was impossibly perfect, angular and sharp, yet softened by an almost ethereal glow. Her eyes were an unnerving shade of jade, so dark they were almost black, but alive with a sense of ancient wisdom that unsettled him. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice caught. His throat felt dry, his words trapped in some invisible cage. The woman, no, the being, finally spoke, her voice smooth, yet filled with authority. "You are awake." Her voice held the weight of something ancient, something important. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. Where am I? The question felt foreign even to him. The words, too simple, too human. His heart thudded painfully against his chest, as if his body instinctively understood something his mind had yet to grasp. "You are aboard my ship," she answered simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the universe. Her eyes fixed on him, intense, studying. "You are a human, that much is clear. But the purpose of your presence is not." Ethan's thoughts scrambled. His hands moved to his sides, searching for the familiar comfort of his tools, his equipment, anything that could anchor him in the reality he knew. But there was nothing, no pack, no comm device. He was alone. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice slightly stronger this time. "I am Velis," she said, her name rolling off her tongue like a distant whisper of a forgotten language. "And I have brought you here for a specific reason." Her gaze lingered on him, unblinking, as though she was studying him, dissecting him with her eyes. Ethan's stomach twisted. He tried to push past his fear, tried to think logically, but the disorientation was overwhelming. Where were the stars? Where was the hum of the engines he had grown used to in the depths of space? This ship, if it was a ship, did not feel like any vessel he'd encountered before. It felt organic, as though the walls themselves were alive. "You were chosen for something," Velis continued, her voice cutting through the fog in his brain. "You will teach my daughter something that has long been lost to my people, something you will find difficult to comprehend, but vital to our survival." Ethan felt the weight of her words press against him, like the gravity he had been denied. "What is it? What do you want me to teach her?" Her lips curled into a thin, knowing smile, and for a brief moment, he could see the glimmer of something dark, something that had little to do with kindness or curiosity. "Reproduction," she said, her voice now almost a whisper. "Tell her how you reproduce, human." Ethan's mind reeled. Reproduce? The concept felt alien, surreal. He was a biologist, but this was beyond any biological study he had ever imagined. His throat went dry, and he found himself unable to speak. Velis moved closer, her towering form bending slightly, her face now mere inches from his. "My species no longer understands reproduction. We have perfected our bodies to the point that we no longer need it. But we have lost something vital, a spark, a creativity that we once had. We have become stagnant." Ethan blinked, absorbing her words. Stagnation? Perfection? His mind tried to connect the dots, but the pieces didn't fit. Who were these creatures? She straightened, her presence commanding. "I believe that understanding your way of reproduction will help us regain what we have lost." His mind raced, scrambling to make sense of the request, but all he could focus on was the strange sensation of being trapped, of being caught between the unknowns of his biology and theirs. Was he a tool now, a subject for their study? The thought made his pulse quicken, but he found no escape, no way to resist. And then came the whisper of a deeper question, one he didn't dare voice. Why him? Ethan's mind churned as the words echoed in his head. "Tell her how you reproduce, human." The strange weight of her request pressed down on him, suffocating his thoughts. He had always prided himself on his calm demeanor, his ability to navigate the mysteries of biology, life, and the cosmos. But now, as he sat in the presence of this alien being, Velis, this towering matriarch of a species he couldn't even begin to understand, he felt like a child lost in a maze of his own fear. "Reproduction," he muttered under his breath, barely able to comprehend the significance of what she had asked. "How do I even begin?" Velis stood there, her eyes unblinking, her face as serene as a statue. The glow from the walls of the chamber bathed her crystalline skin, making her appear both ethereal and entirely unapproachable. She watched him closely as though she could read every thought in his mind. Ethan swallowed, his voice shaking slightly as he managed to find words. "I'm a biologist, but this is not a simple lesson. You're asking me to explain something that goes far beyond anatomy or biology." Velis tilted her head, her expression unchanged, but there was something in the way she stood, unyielding, patient, like an ancient tree weathering a storm. "I understand that it is complex," she said, "but you will teach her. You will show my daughter, Lakira, what your kind does, how you reproduce." His hands trembled at the implications. His training had never prepared him for a task like this. Reproduction was a subject studied in every corner of human science, yes, but explaining it to an entirely different species? A species that had transcended the very concept for eons? His thoughts swirled like a storm, but despite the chaos in his mind, he forced himself to focus, to think. Why? Why now? After all this time? "You will understand when you meet Lakira," Velis interrupted. "But you must know this. We have lost something in our perfection. The Zirans no longer understand the need for natural creation. We are sterile. Cloning and genetic synthesis sustain us, but we are stagnating. Creativity, vitality, these things are beyond our reach, and without them, we wither." Ethan struggled to keep his composure. He had read theories about species that had evolved beyond the need for biological reproduction, but those were hypothetical. He'd never imagined such a species could exist in reality, let alone be so desperate for the very thing humanity had mastered. "Stagnation," he repeated, more to himself than to her. "So, you think that if I teach her how humans reproduce, it'll fix something?" Valus didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Through a doorway, if it could even be called a doorway, stepped another figure. She was shorter than Valus, though still taller than most humans, with skin that seemed to shimmer like liquid silver, marred only by faint glowing patterns that seemed to pulse with an inner life. She was young, but there was a wariness in her eyes, a caution that made her seem older than her years. Ethan's heart skipped in his chest as the woman approached. "This is Lakira," Valus said, her tone softening ever so slightly. Lakira looked at Ethan with a gaze both curious and skeptical, as though she was unsure whether to trust him or to judge him. She said nothing, but her presence filled the room. There was an intensity in her silence, a deep unspoken question that held Ethan captive. As Valus stepped back, allowing Lakira to take center stage, Ethan found himself struggling for control. His thoughts raced again, but this time it wasn't fear alone. There was something else, too. Sympathy? Lakira's eyes held his for a moment, studying him. "You're human," she said, her voice almost musical, but with an underlying harshness. "I thought you were supposed to be different. I expected you to be more somehow. Something more than just a creature that, what did you call it, reproduces." He couldn't help the small chuckle that escaped him, though it sounded strained in his own ears. "We're more than that, Lakira. Much more." Her gaze hardened, her lips curling slightly as if dismissing his words. "Prove it." The challenge hit him like a slap. The tension in the room grew thick, palpable. How could he prove something like that to someone who had no concept of what it meant to be human? His mind scrambled, desperate for a foothold, but he found himself stuttering when he spoke. "It's not just about the act of reproduction. It's about everything that surrounds it. The connections, the emotions, the reasons behind it, the way it shapes us, drives us." "And how does it shape you then?" Lakira cut him off, her tone sharp. "How does it drive you?" Ethan paused. The question caught him off guard, more than he'd care to admit. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then, without thinking, the words spilled from him, raw and unfiltered. "It's about survival, not just of the species, but of the individual, of the connection to someone else, the need to preserve something greater than yourself. It's about—" He trailed off, his voice faltering as he realized how much more complex it was, how far beyond the simplicity of reproduction itself. Lakira tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "So it's not just biology," she said slowly, as if testing the idea. "It's a connection, and that's what makes it important?" Ethan nodded slowly, though his mind was still racing. "Yes, but you need to understand. There are no shortcuts, no quick fixes. Understanding this will change everything for you, Lakira. It's not something you can just grasp in an instant." She took a step back, her gaze never leaving him, and for a moment he thought he saw something almost like pity, or perhaps frustration, flicker across her face. "You are wrong," she said suddenly, her voice cold, almost dismissive. "It is simple. You are human. You are fragile. Your existence depends on these connections. But ours does not. We have moved past such weaknesses." Ethan's throat tightened, and despite his resolve, a surge of frustration bubbled up inside him. "And what will happen if you continue on this path, Lakira? Without connection, without the ability to grow, to change, what's left? Perfection? Is that really enough to keep you alive?" The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with something neither of them could define. The silence stretched between them, heavy and loaded with meaning. Before she could respond, a sudden shudder ran through the room. The walls trembled. The faint glow of the ship flickered. Ethan's heart raced as his instincts kicked in. Something was wrong. This wasn't a natural tremor. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a shadow dart past. a figure cloaked in darkness, moving with speed and purpose. "What's happening?" he demanded, his pulse quickening. Velis, who had been watching the exchange in silence, stiffened. "It seems that not everyone believes in what you are teaching," she said, her voice suddenly tight with tension. "There are those among the Zirans who still fear what you represent." Before Ethan could respond, the lights in the room dimmed completely. In the ensuing darkness, only the faintest glimmers of bioluminescence could be seen, and a terrifying sound reverberated through the ship, a deep, low growl, vibrating in the air like a warning. The stakes had just been raised. The darkness was absolute. Not the kind of night where stars shone brightly, where shadows danced and flickered. No, this darkness was suffocating, unforgiving. The ship's lights had gone out, but the hum of machinery and the distant echo of strained systems only made the quiet more pronounced. Ethan's pulse quickened in the absence of sight, the silence pressing in like a vice. He reached instinctively for the wristband on his arm, activating the emergency lights. A faint greenish glow flickered weakly across the chamber, casting eerie reflections on the walls. He could still see Lakira and Velis, both standing motionless, though something in the way they held themselves, like coiled serpents, told him they were just as unnerved as he was. "What's happening?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though it faltered at the edges. "What was that sound?" Velis didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing as she listened. The tension in the room escalated, and the pulse of the ship's weakening power only seemed to heighten the sense of something impending. Then, a sharp click pierced the silence, a mechanical noise, followed by the unmistakable hiss of hydraulics and the sound of footsteps, too many for any normal crew to make. "They're here," Lakira said, her voice low and taut with barely contained anger. "The ones who oppose your teaching." "Who?" Ethan asked, stepping closer to Velis, his mind racing. "Who are they?" "They are the Harbingers," Velis said, her voice barely a whisper, yet somehow carrying an immense weight. "A faction of the Ziran Council who do not believe in the softening of our species. They see your presence as a threat, as something that could unravel everything we've worked for." "Unravel?" Ethan's mind spun. He had thought that teaching Lakira about human reproduction was a challenge, but this was something far more dangerous. "You're telling me they'll try to stop me?" Velis nodded, the glow from her skin casting sharp shadows across her face. "They believe the only way to preserve the purity of the Ziran race is to reject what they consider weaknesses, emotions, connection, life itself. They've become zealots. They would rather see us die than change." The words settled heavily in the room. Die rather than change. The sheer weight of the Ziran's conviction rattled Ethan's nerves, but it was the deep, unsettling truth in Velis's voice that made the ground beneath him feel unstable. There was no escaping this. The faction wasn't just an obstacle, they were a threat, a force that would stop at nothing to eradicate the very possibility of change. Suddenly, the air shifted. A new presence made itself known, not in sight, but in sound. The hollow, eerie wail of something unearthly filled the room. The low growl that had reverberated through the walls earlier intensified, vibrating the floor beneath Ethan's boots. It was almost as if the walls themselves were alive, trying to warn them. "Stay close," Velis commanded, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Before Ethan could respond, the sound grew louder, and the floor beneath him trembled violently. It was as if the ship itself were shaking, reacting to the force now bearing down on them. In the next breath, the doors at the far side of the chamber exploded open, sending debris scattering across the room. 3 figures stood in the doorway, their silhouettes barely visible in the weak emergency lighting. Each one was tall, cloaked in shadows, their features obscured by masks of glistening metal and dark fabric. They moved with terrifying precision, their footsteps synchronized in a haunting rhythm. "The Harbingers," Velis hissed. Ethan's heart slammed in his chest. He had expected danger, but this was something else. These beings radiated an unnatural stillness, like predators who had learned the art of waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Valus," one of them said, the voice smooth but laced with venom. "You've allowed this weakness into our midst. Do you not understand the cost of your decisions?" Ethan froze. The voice, it was familiar. Too familiar. It struck something deep within him, a sharp pang of recognition that he couldn't immediately place. Valus stepped forward, her posture unyielding. "You are mistaken, Erix," she said, her tone cold. "I did not allow anything. The decision has already been made. This human will teach what needs to be taught. There is no turning back." A low laugh echoed from behind the masks of the harbingers. "You've allowed this human to reshape the very foundation of our existence. You think he can undo what we've built? You think we will allow him to redefine what it means to be Zirin?" Ethan's stomach twisted as the words sunk in. They weren't just against the idea of change. They were actively trying to preserve something that had long since reached the point of corruption. They weren't just trying to stop him. They were trying to stop everyone from even considering the idea of transformation. Lakira stepped forward, her gaze sharp, her eyes flashing with something like rebellion. "You underestimate him," she said, her voice ringing with an edge that neither Ethan nor Valus had expected. "You underestimate what change can do." Erix's masked face turned toward her, his expression unreadable, but his voice was thick with disdain. "And you, my own daughter, are nothing but a pawn in this foolish game." Ethan felt the temperature in the room plummet. The word pawn felt like a weight hanging in the air, suffocating him, until the silence was unbearable. "You want to end this," Valus said, her voice low but powerful. "Then you will have to destroy everything, every belief, every idea. You will have to erase us." Lakira's eyes locked with Ethan's, and for a split second, something passed between them. A spark, perhaps of understanding or something darker. He couldn't tell, but the intensity of the moment had him questioning everything. Was she a willing part of this? Or was she caught in a struggle as deep and painful as his own? Erix chuckled, the sound low and rumbling. "You think I'm afraid of destroying things?" he sneered. "I've been doing it for centuries." Without warning, the harbingers moved. The room seemed to close in on itself, the shadows becoming heavier, the air thicker. One of the harbingers lunged toward Valus, their movements too swift to track, but before they could reach her, a bright flash of light erupted from Lakira's hand, a glowing energy pulse that sent the figure staggering back, blinking in confusion. "I'll protect my mother," Lakira said, her voice steady now, her resolve clear. "And I will protect what's left of us." Erix's eyes narrowed as he wiped a trickle of dark energy from his mouth. "Then you will be the first to burn." As the words hung in the air, everything erupted into chaos. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the harbingers launched forward, but in that instant, something unexpected happened. Lakira moved again, faster than before, her energy blasting in a brilliant wave that momentarily blinded him. And then, silence. The aftermath of the conflict left Ethan reeling, his senses disoriented, but the landscape had changed. The stakes had been raised. Lakira was no longer just an observer. She was part of this. She had made a choice, and now Ethan had no choice but to follow. The silence was deafening. Ethan stood frozen in the midst of the wreckage, his heart pounding in his chest as the remnants of the battle echoed around him. The blast from Lakira's energy pulse still hung in the air, a haze of ionized particles clinging to the broken walls and scattered debris. The harbingers, those masked figures who had once seemed so invincible, were gone, vanishing into the ship's labyrinthine corridors with the precision of shadows. Their threat had been thwarted, but not without consequence. Lakira stood before him, her chest heaving, eyes glowing with the remnants of the power she had unleashed. She was no longer the uncertain young Zirin he had met. The power that had sparked in her now radiated with a quiet fury that demanded respect. Her eyes locked with his, but instead of the warmth and curiosity that had once seemed to pull her toward him, there was something harder, something that suggested she knew more than she had ever let on. You, Ethan began, his voice rough, still adjusting to the chaos around him. What is all of this? What did they mean when they said you were their daughter? Lakira's gaze flickered momentarily toward Velas, who had moved to survey the damage. Her mother was silent, calculating, but there was a subtle tightening in her stance that suggested the revelation had not landed lightly. We've told you bits and pieces, Velas said, her voice calm but tinged with an unmistakable weariness. But there's more, much more, than we've allowed you to see. Ethan swallowed hard. What more? Why do the Harbingers want me gone so badly? Why is my presence a threat to them? A sudden flash of memory cut through him, sharp and jarring. The look in Velas's eyes when he had first learned of the Xirin's reproductive system, her reluctance to explain it fully. The strange way Lakira had been drawn to him from the start, as if some hidden thread had bound them together. You have to understand, Ethan, Lakira said, her voice quieter now, less like the boldness of someone ready to fight, and more like someone on the verge of confessing a terrible truth. It's not just about you. It's about what you represent. And what do I represent? Ethan asked, his voice sharp with a sudden sense of urgency. His pulse was racing now, fear creeping in around the edges. Was there something he hadn't understood about his own role in all of this? Lakira's lips trembled, a brief flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. It vanished quickly, replaced by a guarded resolve. You're the last hope for a species on the brink of extinction. Velas finally spoke, her tone unwavering. The Xirins have become sterile, Ethan. We can no longer reproduce. For generations, our people have been struggling against this curse. The Harbingers, those fanatics who just attacked us, believe that we are to die out, that our legacy is over. But there are those of us who have found a way to change that. Ethan's mind struggled to make sense of it all. The pieces were finally falling into place, but they didn't fit together smoothly. He thought back to the strange, unsettling moments, Lakira's curiosity about human biology, the way she had gravitated toward him, like an echo of something he couldn't yet grasp. Your people, Ethan started, but his throat tightened. You want me to father your children? The words hung between them like a raw truth. His body went still, almost frozen, as he waited for the response. Lakira looked away, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. Velas stepped forward, her eyes dark with something more akin to pain than anger. It's not just about fathering children. It's about reviving our people, Ethan. You represent the possibility of survival. But why me? Ethan's mind spun, questions upon questions crashing into each other. Why are you choosing me? Velas's expression darkened. You are not the only human to have crossed into our world, but you are the only one with the potential to carry our bloodline forward. We've studied you, Ethan. Your biology, your genetic makeup. You are the one we need. Lakira's eyes met his again, this time with a hint of something softer, a strange apology mixed with her steady resolve. It's not just about our survival, it's about change, she added, her voice almost pleading. We need you because your species, your people, have the answer to what we've been seeking. We've known it for a long time. It's not just biology, it's the human spirit, the connection you all have, the way you form bonds, the way you protect each other. We've lost that. A shiver ran through Ethan's spine, his body feeling suddenly heavy. He wanted to deny it, to push back, but the weight of her words was undeniable. Every moment he had spent with Lakira, the way her mind had seemed to reach out to him, the way his own instincts had responded. He couldn't ignore it. He couldn't pretend there wasn't some unspoken truth between them, something ancient and inevitable. But why does that make the Harbingers want me gone? Ethan asked, still struggling to reconcile everything. The Harbingers believe we should not change, Velas answered, her voice cold with a steel edge. They believe that the Xirins were meant to be pure, untainted by anything that could weaken them. They see the bond between our species and humans as an abomination. They would rather see us all perish than live in a world where we're forced to adapt, forced to merge. A thick silence settled over them, the gravity of the situation weighing heavier with every passing second. "So, I'm not just here to teach," Ethan said slowly, the realization dawning on him with a chilling clarity. "I'm here to save you, to help your people survive." "More than that," Lakira whispered. "You're here to change us, and we're ready to change." Ethan's head spun, the magnitude of the decision before him almost too much to process. Could he accept this? Could he really be the key to saving an entire species, changing an entire species? He wasn't just a human anymore, caught in a strange political struggle. He was the linchpin, the living solution to an extinction that had loomed over the Zirans for centuries. But as he looked at Lakira, her face softening in the greenish glow of the emergency lights, he saw something else, something more. Hope. "I don't know what to do," he confessed quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Lakira stepped closer, her hand brushing his lightly. "You don't have to decide now, but you will have to decide, Ethan. We all will. The harbingers won't stop coming, and the longer you wait, the harder it will be to survive." The weight of her words pressed down on him, and for the first time, Ethan understood the true stakes. His choices, his actions, would shape not just his own fate, but the fate of an entire species. And there was no turning back. The question wasn't whether he could do it, it was whether he would. The hum of the ship's engines was barely perceptible, a soft murmur beneath the roar of Ethan's thoughts. His mind had become a whirlwind of questions, possibilities, and the weight of decisions that had never been his to make. Now, as he stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes tracing the trajectory of the Ziran ship as it sailed through the boundless blackness of space, he knew the time had come. There was no more running, no more wondering about what would happen next. The path had unfolded before him, and he had to walk it, whatever the cost. Lakira stood beside him, her expression unreadable, but her presence solid as a rock. She had always been there, a constant, offering insight but never pushing him. Even now she was waiting for him to make the final decision, her faith in him unwavering. It was in her eyes, that quiet hope that he would choose not just for himself, but for her people, for their survival. "We're approaching the rendezvous point." Velas's voice came from the comm system, a sharp contrast to the gentle hum of the engines. She had been quieter lately, as though the burden of leadership and the weight of everything they had shared with Ethan had finally begun to settle on her shoulders. The war with the Harbingers was drawing to its final stages, and with it, the decision that would shape the fate of an entire species. Ethan's fingers tightened around the armrest, his knuckles pale. The mission was set. They would meet with the remaining Ziran leaders who still hoped to see their people thrive. Their plan was simple: convince the leaders of the necessity of forging a new path, one where their people would no longer be bound by tradition, one where the Zirans could adapt, evolve, and survive, with human blood as their legacy. But in the back of his mind, Ethan knew the truth. The plan was far from simple. The Harbingers would never let it happen. They were too entrenched in their beliefs. And the real question was whether Ethan had the strength to become more than just a pawn in a war that had been raging for generations. "Is it the right thing to do?" he murmured, half to himself. Lakira's eyes flicked toward him, her face softening with something close to sadness. "There are no guarantees in this, Ethan. We can't predict the future. We can only choose what we believe is best." Her voice was quiet, but the sincerity in it burned through him like a fire. "We've come this far, and now it's up to you." He glanced at her, feeling the weight of her words sink into his chest. "It's up to you." For the first time since he'd learned about the Ziran's fate, Ethan didn't feel overwhelmed. He didn't feel the urge to flee or hesitate. There was a certainty in his heart now, born from everything he had witnessed and learned. He had spent too long questioning, analyzing, doubting. But he had been shown the truth about their people, about what they needed to survive, about the impossible crossroads they all faced. "What if we fail?" Ethan asked, voice strained. "We won't," Lakira answered firmly. though the shadows in her eyes hinted that she had no idea whether that was true. We've made it this far. Together. Whatever happens next, it's in our hands. Ethan took a deep breath, staring out into the endless abyss of space. His mind raced with everything he had learned, the Zirans' desperate need for change, the rise of the Harbingers, the stakes that now felt as real as the air he breathed. And with all of it, one truth stood out like a shining beacon. The future was uncertain, but it was his to shape. A buzzing on the console interrupted his thoughts. The comm system crackled to life once again. "Ethan." Velas's voice came through, strong but laced with an undercurrent of tension. "The Harbingers are here." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He exchanged a glance with Lakira, both of them instantly moving toward the ship's controls, their earlier silence giving way to the finality of their mission. "Prepare yourselves," Velas continued, her voice tight with resolve. "This is it. Whatever happens, we do it together." The ship surged forward, faster than before, as if sensing the urgency of the moment. The stars outside seemed to blur together, streaking across the sky in flashes of brilliant light as the Ziran vessel entered the system. Ethan's heart pounded as they approached the designated meeting point, a desolate moon orbiting a gas giant, the perfect neutral ground for the final confrontation. Ethan's mind raced through 100 scenarios, each one more harrowing than the last. He had learned that the Zirans' true strength lay not in their technology, but in their will to survive. And if the Harbingers had anything to say about it, that will was about to be tested beyond measure. As they neared the moon, the ship shuddered, a sudden jolt that sent them all tumbling forward. Lights flickered and alarms blared. "Report!" Ethan shouted, grabbing onto a nearby support beam to steady himself. "We're under attack," Velas said grimly. "The Harbingers are launching everything they have. This is a final warning. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything." Ethan's pulse raced. This was it. No more time for hesitation. No more time to wonder what could have been. The Harbingers were here, and they weren't backing down. The only way forward was to face them head-on and make a choice. Lakira moved toward him, her eyes locked on his, full of determination and something deeper. "We can't do this alone," she said, "but together we have a chance." Ethan didn't need to ask what she meant. The decision had already been made. He turned to the controls, his hands steady now, as he initiated the ship's countermeasures. Weapons hummed to life around him, the engines thrumming with the power they would need to survive this fight. And then, as the ship was rocked by another blast, he heard the one thing he had been hoping for, but had feared he would never hear. "We're with you, Ethan." It was Velas, and in her voice there was no hesitation, no doubt. The Zirans had chosen their path. They had chosen to evolve, to fight for survival. And in that moment, Ethan knew what he had to do, not just for them, for all of them. As the stars above them exploded into a burst of light, he gave the order, and the war began. Ethan's hand rested on the console, fingers tense, but his heart was clear. This was his moment. The future of the Zirans, and his own, had never been so intertwined. The choice had been made. Now it was time to live it. The first thing Daniel Cross felt was silence, not the comforting, expectant silence of a quiet night on Earth, but an oppressive void that pressed against his ears, stealing his breath. His eyes fluttered open to a world awash in alien hues, light and shadow weaving patterns he couldn't comprehend. The cockpit of his craft, once a sanctuary among the stars, now lay shattered and useless around him. A jagged tear ran through the canopy, where branches draped in luminescent moss clawed their way in like spectral fingers. Beyond, the forest seemed alive, pulsating softly, as if breathing in sync with some unseen rhythm. Daniel's fingers curled against the armrest of his seat, the leather damp beneath his grip. Blood? No, sweat. He raised his hand to his temple, brushing away a thin rivulet trickling down to his jawline. His helmet's heads-up display was dark, the neural interface eerily cold against the base of his skull. Then he heard it, a whispering sound, faint but deliberate, just beyond the edges of his perception. A rustle here, a soft click there, like an intricate language too ancient for human comprehension. "Hello." His voice came out hoarse, swallowed almost instantly by the oppressive forest. He unfastened the harness with trembling hands and rose, swaying as gravity reasserted itself. His boots sank slightly into the mossy ground as he stepped out of the wreckage, the rich, earthy scent of the alien world mingling with the metallic tang of burnt circuitry. The air tasted thick, humid, each breath dragging strange sensations through his chest. Yet it wasn't the environment that unnerved him most, it was the distinct feeling of being watched. Daniel turned slowly, scanning his surroundings. The forest extended endlessly in every direction, the trees twisting skyward with gnarled elegance, their bioluminescent veins pulsating faintly. But no animals darted between the trunks, no insects buzzed, no birds sang. Just that infernal silence, broken only by the occasional whisper of movement he couldn't pinpoint. It wasn't until he took his third step forward that he saw her. Emerging from the shadows as if birthed by the forest itself, a figure stood, tall and poised. Her skin glowed faintly, a rich emerald sheen that caught the light of the forest's luminescence. Long dark hair fell in intricate braids over her shoulders, adorned with glimmering beads and feathers. Her eyes, sharp and golden, locked onto his with a predatory intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. She was not alone. Figures materialized behind her one by one, moving in synchronized silence. All women, all bearing that same shimmering green skin and feline grace. Their attire was a seamless blend of tribal and technological, a mix of woven fibers and sleek metallic plates that shimmered like liquid silver. Weapons, too, adorned their forms, curved blades strapped to their backs, glowing rods in their hands. Daniel froze, his instincts screaming for him to run, though every fiber of logic reminded him he wouldn't get far. The leader, the first to step forward, tilted her head, studying him as though he were some strange, fragile creature. Her gaze wasn't hostile, yet it carried a weight that made him feel utterly exposed. "Where am I?" His voice barely cracked the stillness. The woman didn't answer, not at first. Instead, she raised a hand, her long fingers tracing an invisible line through the air. The forest seemed to respond, the bioluminescence dimming slightly, as if bowing to her presence. "You are not of this place," she finally said, her voice low and resonant, each syllable laced with an accent he couldn't place. "No," he managed. "My ship, there was a storm, and—" "Enough." She stepped closer, her movements smooth, deliberate. The others remained behind her, their stares unwavering. Daniel took a cautious step back, only to feel the cool press of steel against his neck. One of them had circled behind him without a sound. "Move," she commanded, gesturing toward a path that hadn't been there a moment ago. "I don't even know who you are," he said, his voice trembling despite his best effort to sound firm. The woman stopped, her golden eyes narrowing. "You will." Her words carried a finality that sent another shiver down his spine. The weapon at his neck nudged him forward, and he stumbled into motion, the strange procession moving as one through the forest. The path was narrow, bordered by trees that seemed to lean in, their luminous branches forming a canopy overhead. The air grew denser, the ground softer beneath his boots. Every so often, he caught glimpses of movement in his periphery, flickers of light, shifting shadows. But each time he turned, there was nothing there. They emerged into a clearing at last, and Daniel's breath hitched. The encampment sprawled before him, a breathtaking fusion of the natural and the artificial. Towering structures carved from living wood and glowing stone spiraled upward, their surfaces etched with flowing symbols that pulsed faintly. Bridges of woven vines connected platforms high above, where more of the emerald-skinned women moved with practiced ease. At the center of it all stood a monolithic obelisk, its surface alive with shifting patterns of light. The symbols were similar to those he'd seen etched into the structures, but they seemed to react to his presence, glowing brighter as he was led closer. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The leader didn't respond. Instead, she turned to the others and spoke in their lilting language, her tone commanding yet calm. They dispersed, leaving Daniel alone with her and the towering obelisk. "You have come," she said, her gaze piercing. "I didn't come here by choice," Daniel replied, his frustration mounting. "I crashed. I don't even know where here is." She studied him for a long moment before stepping closer, so close he could see the faint scars tracing her otherwise flawless skin. "You may not have chosen," she said, her voice softening. "But you are here, and now so are we." Daniel frowned, confusion warring with unease. "What do you mean?" The obelisk flared suddenly, casting his shadow long and sharp across the clearing. The patterns on its surface shifted faster, their glow almost hypnotic. "Welcome," she said, her voice barely audible above the hum of the obelisk. "To the end of your beginning." The next few days blurred together for Daniel, the alien world around him shifting like a half-remembered dream. The tribe's encampment had become a labyrinth of strange rituals and curious customs, a place where every glance felt weighted with meaning. Yet, despite the overwhelming alienness, there was a pattern, an order he couldn't quite grasp, one that eluded him no matter how many times he observed. The emerald-skinned women, stoic and mysterious, went about their tasks with a quiet precision. Weapons were honed, tools repaired, and the strange obelisk at the center of the camp hummed in a constant, almost hypnotic rhythm. Kaelra, the leader, was a constant presence, her sharp eyes ever watchful, her every movement commanding respect. She spoke little, but her gaze spoke volumes. It was her gaze that unsettled Daniel the most. In it, he saw not just a leader, but something more, an ocean of emotion carefully concealed beneath the surface. Power, yes, but also something else, something buried too deep to uncover with simple questions. He could almost hear her thoughts, heavy with the weight of something urgent. And yet, for all her strength, Kaelra had never once addressed him directly about his role in their society. Every encounter felt like an unspoken challenge, a puzzle waiting to be solved, but the pieces were always just out of reach. Until now. It was late, the air thick with humidity, and Daniel stood in the middle of the camp, his mind racing. He had been waiting for an answer, for something, anything to explain why he was here. But the time for waiting had passed. He had caught glimpses of their lives, their strange, purposeful existence, and it was starting to make him feel like an outsider in a world that should have felt like the future. There was something fundamental about the Zorvani, a connection between them and the land, and it seemed to pulse with an undercurrent of urgency. That urgency came to a head when Kaelra finally approached him, her tall, commanding presence cutting through the noise of the camp. "I need you to come with me," she said, her voice low, just above a whisper, as though the words were meant only for him. He nodded slowly, his pulse quickening. This was it. The explanation. The reason he had been brought here. Without a word, he followed her through the winding paths of the encampment, the other women falling silent as they passed. The air felt denser as they walked, charged with a strange energy. Even the trees seemed to lean closer, their bioluminescent branches swaying as if in tune with their footsteps. They reached the outer edges of the encampment, where the forest thickened, the sounds of the camp fading behind them. The path they followed narrowed, the air growing cooler, the silence between them growing heavier. Kaelra didn't speak, but Daniel could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing against him, urging him forward without a word. They arrived at a clearing that Daniel hadn't seen before, a place that felt ancient, forgotten by time. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone structure, jagged and imposing, covered in moss and vines. The markings on its surface seemed to glow faintly in the twilight, shifting and changing as though alive. "This is where it begins," Kaelra said quietly, her voice echoing in the stillness. Daniel felt a chill creep down his spine. The stone felt wrong. Not in a way that was immediately threatening, but in a way that tugged at something deep within him, a primal instinct that whispered to turn away. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice barely above a breath. Kalra paused before answering, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. This is where we first came to be, where our history began. He frowned, confused. I thought your people had been here for millennia. Not here. Her voice hardened, a flicker of something dangerous passing through her eyes. Not in the way you understand it. This is where we were born into this existence, where we were chosen to survive. Daniel stepped forward, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Chosen? She nodded, then gestured toward the structure. Our ancestors made a bargain with the land, with the very forces that gave this world life. They gave us power, strength, longevity, and the ability to survive. In exchange, we were bound to this place, bound to the land itself. But that bargain is fraying. The land grows weak, the power fading. And now, she trailed off, her expression hardening. Now, we must seek new strength. Her words sent a ripple of unease through him, but before he could ask anything further, a sound interrupted them. A low hum, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder with each passing second. The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, and the air grew thicker, charged with a strange energy. Is that... Daniel began, his voice faltering. Them, Kalra said, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the darkness beyond the clearing. The Kelkor. Daniel's stomach dropped. The name was unfamiliar, but the way Kalra said it carried a weight that chilled him. The ground shook again, this time more violently. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. Tall, twisted creatures with jagged, angular features, their bodies slick with dark, oily skin. Their eyes gleamed a deep crimson, glowing in the low light like embers in a fire. They've found us, Kalra said, her voice tight with fear and resolve, and we are no longer prepared. Daniel's heart raced. The creatures moved with terrifying speed, closing in from all sides. There was no time to think, no time to plan. Kalra stepped forward, drawing a sleek, curved blade from her side, her muscles tensing as she prepared for the inevitable clash. Run, she said, her eyes flashing with a fierce, unspoken command. Daniel hesitated, torn between his fear and the urge to help. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, the choices piling up, and his mind was spinning. But the Kelkor were closing in too fast. He turned and ran, pushing himself to the limits of his endurance. He could hear the chaos behind him, the clash of metal, the hissing screech of the Kelkor. But his only focus was the path ahead, the flickering light of the encampment just visible through the trees. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the unknown. What was happening here? Who were these creatures? And why had he been chosen to be part of this fight? All Daniel knew for certain was that he was running out of time. Daniel's feet hammered against the ground, his breath ragged in the humid air, the soft, eerie glow of the camp receding with each frantic step. Behind him, the Kelkor's chilling screeches reverberated through the trees, their dark forms slithering through the shadows, relentless and determined. He could hear the crackle of branches snapping, the sounds of battle echoing faintly from the clearing, but there was no time to look back, no time to question what was happening. The path seemed endless, stretching before him like a twisted dream, and still, the forest closed in, the trees shifting and warping in ways that made his head spin. He stumbled over roots and rocks, his body sore from the crash, but adrenaline kept him moving. What had Kalra said? The Kelkor. What were they? His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information he had gleaned. The name meant nothing to him, but the fear in her voice, that was something he couldn't ignore. These creatures were not just enemies. They were something more, something ancient, something deadly. And Kalra, she hadn't been at his side when he ran. She hadn't asked him to stay and fight. It wasn't like her to leave someone behind. Was she still alive? The thought gnawed at him, and though his legs screamed for him to stop, he pushed himself harder. He couldn't leave her to whatever fate the Kelkor had in store. But as he broke through the edge of the forest and into the clearing, everything stopped. The camp, the structures, the trees, all stood untouched. The hum of the obelisk, which had been so constant, was silent. A deep, unnatural stillness had settled over everything. There was no sound of battle, no movement. And then he saw her. Kaelra stood in the center of the clearing, her blade drawn, but her posture was not one of readiness. She was waiting. "Kaelra!" Daniel's voice cracked as he shouted her name. He took a step forward, then froze. There was something different about her. Her emerald skin shimmered in the dim light, but it wasn't the same vibrant glow it had once held. It was darker now, more muted, as though some vital energy had been drained from her. Her eyes, those sharp, golden eyes, no longer held the same steely resolve. They were distant, unfocused, as though she were lost in a trance. And behind her, the Kelkor stood. At first, Daniel thought they had somehow stopped in their pursuit, but then he realized they were not attacking. They were circling her, watching her with an unsettling calm. Their leader, a massive, hulking creature with dark, jagged armor covering its skin, was standing before her, its eyes glowing a faint crimson. The air between them seemed to hum with an energy Daniel could feel in his bones, a strange connection he couldn't explain. "Kaelra!" he called again, his voice filled with urgency. "What's happening? Are you—" But she didn't respond. She didn't even move. It was then that the Kelkor leader spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the earth itself. "The time has come." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable, a statement, not a question. The other Kelkor fell silent, their eyes flickering between Kaelra and the leader, as though they were awaiting something. Daniel felt the weight of their collective gaze press against him, making his chest tighten with anxiety. "What's happening?" he demanded again, more forcefully this time. "What is this?" Kaelra's head slowly turned toward him, her golden eyes meeting his. For a moment, he saw a flicker of recognition, a fleeting moment of clarity before it vanished behind the fog of confusion. Her lips parted, and for the first time since he'd arrived on this world, she spoke to him, her voice soft and distant. "You are the key," she said, each word thick with an unspoken weight. Daniel froze, his mind racing. The key to what? To what? Her eyes clouded again, the clarity of that moment slipping away. The balance, the future of my people, the end. Daniel's stomach churned. He could feel the ground beneath him shift, a tremor that rattled his bones. The Kelkor were closing in again, their monstrous forms advancing, but there was no sign of Kaelra moving to defend herself. It was as though the battle was over, before it had even begun. And then, everything changed. A blinding flash of light erupted from the obelisk at the center of the camp, its surface crackling with energy, its pulse suddenly erratic and wild. The ground trembled again, and Daniel was thrown off balance, his hands instinctively reaching for something to steady himself. Kaelra's form seemed to flicker in the light, her image distorting, shifting like a mirage. The Kelkor leader let out a deep, rumbling growl, its eyes narrowing as it backed away from her. "The seal is broken," it hissed. "It has begun." The energy from the obelisk surged outward, crashing over Daniel like a wave. He gasped, unable to breathe, as the world around him warped and twisted. The trees seemed to shift in impossible directions, the sky above twisting into unnatural colors. And then, in the center of it all, Kaelra began to change. Her skin, once a vibrant emerald, darkened further, until it was nearly black, her body crackling with an energy he couldn't understand. Her eyes burned with a golden intensity, her gaze locking onto the Kelkor leader. "No," Daniel breathed, a cold realization sinking in. The Kelkor leader was backing away now, its fear palpable. But it was too late. The energy in the air was too thick, too potent. Kaelra was no longer just a leader. She was something more, something that defied his understanding of the world. She raised her hand, and the air around her responded, swirling with power. The Kelkor paused, their eyes wide with shock and terror, but it was clear they knew what was happening. And in that moment, Daniel understood the truth. Kael'ra wasn't just the leader of her people. She was their last hope, and perhaps their undoing. "Kael'ra, no!" Daniel shouted, but his words were lost in the roar of energy that erupted from the obelisk, engulfing everything in its path. The sky shattered above them. The Kelkor screamed, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. It was the beginning of the end. The air felt thick with anticipation, the lingering hum of energy from the obelisk still crackling in the atmosphere, like the quiet before a storm. Daniel stood frozen in place, eyes locked on the swirling chaos before him. The Kelkor had scattered, their fear tangible, but none of them dared to approach the center of the clearing. Kael'ra stood at the heart of it all, her figure now a silhouette against the seething light, her transformation almost complete. Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was something much larger. The truth, the terrifying truth, was unraveling before him, and he was at its center. Kael'ra, the leader of the Zorvani, wasn't merely a guardian of her people. She was the key to everything, but now, as the energy of the obelisk spiraled around her, he understood. She had become something else, something beyond human comprehension. His breath caught in his throat as he watched her shape shift, her form bending with the energy like a piece of cloth caught in a windstorm. Her eyes, once filled with determination, were now pools of liquid gold, burning with the intensity of 1,000 stars. The very air around her hummed, crackling with raw power. She was no longer the woman he had come to know, the stoic leader, the quiet warrior. She was a force of nature, a creature of unimaginable strength, and yet, in the heart of that swirling tempest, Kael'ra's voice, calm, steady, but laced with an undercurrent of pain, cut through the chaos. "It has begun." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What has begun?" he shouted over the growing din, but she didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, her body moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost too perfect, too deliberate. The energy around her swirled in time with her movements, as though the very elements of the world bent to her will. And then she turned to face him. Her eyes, once distant, were now clear, focused. She was there. And yet, in that moment, Daniel knew she was also somewhere else entirely. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cutting through the storm like a knife. "This is the only way to save them." "Save who?" Daniel demanded. "Save the tribe? You've already done that. You've become—" His words faltered as the realization hit him with the force of a thunderclap. "You've become something else, something beyond Zorvani. What are you doing?" Kael'ra's face softened, the hardness of her features yielding to something raw, vulnerable. "I'm not just saving them, Daniel. I'm saving everything." His mind reeled as she stepped closer. The glow of her eyes burned with an intensity that was almost unbearable to look at. "This planet, this world, is dying. The bargain my people made with the land, with the very fabric of the universe itself, it's fraying, it's coming undone. And now, with the Kelkor's return, there is no time left to rebuild what was lost." The wind around them picked up, and the trees groaned as though protesting. Daniel could feel the earth beneath his feet trembling, shaking with a deep, ancient power. It was as though the planet itself was alive and angry. "The Kelkor," she continued, her voice low, almost mournful. "They are not just enemies. They are part of the reason for our fall. They are ancient, yes, but their return is a sign of something far worse, a curse that's been waiting for eons to claim us. And now the bargain I made with the land, it is broken. I have to fix it." Daniel's throat tightened as he began to understand. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was something larger, something far more dangerous. Kael'ra's transformation, her power, it wasn't just a means of defense. It was a last-ditch effort to undo the irreversible damage caused by her ancestors' deal with the land. "And what happens to you?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling. He couldn't hide the fear in his tone, couldn't mask the horror that gripped him as the weight of her words sank in. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with an unbearable sorrow. I will lose myself. The wind howled louder now, the trees bending beneath its fury. The Kelkor were no longer the only threat. This storm, this strange, unnatural force was the real enemy. It was closing in, pulling the world apart at its seams. Daniel took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Number, there has to be another way. We can... But she shook her head, her expression unreadable. This is the only way to stop the Kelkor, to save the Zorvani, and to save you. Save me? Daniel echoed, a laugh escaping his lips, though it held no humor. I'm not the one who needs saving. Her gaze softened, and she took another step toward him, her fingers brushing his arm. But you are. You always have been. And in that moment, he understood. She wasn't just offering him salvation. She was giving him something much more precious, a chance to change the course of history, to right a wrong that had festered for centuries. But it came with a cost. Kelra's body trembled, the energy around her pulsating with raw intensity. The obelisk had gone silent, its hum replaced by an eerie, unnatural quiet that stretched out in every direction. Daniel could feel the pressure in his chest, as if the very air had thickened, become suffocating. The world felt like it was on the brink of something colossal, something inevitable. What do you need from me? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Kelra's eyes flashed with an emotion he couldn't place. A choice. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. A choice? To stop what's coming. To save my people and yours, she said, her voice trembling. You have to make a sacrifice. A choice that will change everything. The storm around them grew stronger, the winds howling as though the world itself were protesting her words. Daniel's heart raced as he searched her eyes for an answer. But there was none. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, suffocating him, and all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat, pounding in his ears. This was it, the point of no return. He was standing at the edge of the abyss, and the only way forward was to leap into the unknown. As the world around him began to fracture, his mind racing, one question echoed in his mind. Would he make the sacrifice? Would he choose to save everything, even at the cost of losing the one thing he had come to care for? The storm answered for him. It was already too late. The choice had already been made. The world held its breath. Kelra stood motionless, her body trembling with the force of the power coursing through her, her eyes wide with a golden glow that seemed to sear the air itself. The storm had reached its peak. The wind howled around them like a ravenous beast, tearing through the trees, its fury matched only by the pulsing energy that radiated from the obelisk. The sky above had cracked open, a jagged line of swirling darkness, as though the very heavens had begun to collapse. Daniel stood at the edge of the clearing, his heart pounding, each beat echoing in his ears. The decision he had made was not a decision at all, not really. It had been a call to action, the only path left to him in this world that was unraveling. Yet now, standing before Kelra, the finality of it pressed down on him like the weight of an ancient mountain. I don't know what will happen, Kelra's voice came, barely a whisper over the din of the storm. But it must be done. For all of us. She was right. The world was ending, but not in the way they had expected. The Kelkor had been a symptom, not the cause. The true threat had always been this rift in the fabric of existence, this poison that had slowly spread through the heart of the Zorvani, and perhaps the land itself. Kelra was no longer just a leader. She was the last line of defense against an ancient and unimaginable force. Daniel looked at her, his mind caught in a fog of conflicting emotions. She had become something more than human, more than the warrior he had come to admire. And yet, the person he had cared for, the one who had shown him compassion in a world full of cold distance, was still there, somewhere beneath the layers of power. I'm not going to lose you, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I can't lose you. Her golden eyes softened, just for a moment. You already have. And with that, she reached toward him. The energy around her pulsed in response, an unbearable force that seemed to bend the very air. Her hand was trembling, but her gaze never wavered, and as she touched his face, the world around them fractured. The power of the obelisk surged, its light blinding, its pulse sharp and unforgiving. For a brief moment, Daniel was filled with the overwhelming sensation of being pulled apart, his very atoms torn between realities, between worlds. The storm raged louder, deafening now, but Daniel could hear her voice beneath it all, calm and steady, as though she were speaking from within his soul. "This is the only way, Daniel. You must trust me. I will hold it back, but you must finish it." His chest tightened. He didn't know how to finish it. He didn't know how to save her. But he did know one thing. He had to believe. Believe in her. Believe in the cause that had led them both here, to this final moment. The air around them crackled with an almost unbearable intensity. It felt as if the very planet were gasping, waiting for something, waiting for him. Then, in a flash of painful clarity, Daniel understood. The power that Kelra had tapped into, it was a desperate act, an act of creation and destruction bound together in an unholy bond. She was both the cure and the cost. She would either stabilize the world or it would collapse entirely, and the only way to stop it from destroying everything was for him to sever the connection she had made, to undo the power she had unleashed. The realization cut through him like a blade. He had to make the hardest choice of all. He stepped forward, his heart racing. The storm raged louder, as though the earth itself was screaming at him to turn away. But he didn't hesitate. He reached for Kelra, his hand shaking as he pressed it against her own. For a fleeting second, the connection between them flared, the energy around them swirling faster, heavier, until it felt as though the world itself was spinning out of control. But then, just as quickly, everything went still. Kelra's eyes met his, no longer burning with the golden light of power, but soft, filled with the recognition of the man she had once known. And in that moment, she whispered the words that would haunt him forever. "I am sorry." And then, with a final decisive motion, Daniel reached into the heart of the storm and pulled her from it. The bond was severed, the power broken. The energy that had been swirling around them dissipated, fading like a receding tide. The storm, the rift, the twisting air, all of it vanished in an instant, leaving nothing but a quiet, deathly stillness. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just silence. Then the earth shuddered beneath them, and Daniel's knees buckled, his body falling to the ground. He gasped for breath, the world around him still. But Kelra was still standing. Her skin had returned to its natural emerald hue, and her eyes were no longer gold. They were simply Kelra's, the leader, the warrior, the woman he had come to care for, against all odds. She looked at him, her expression soft, almost unreadable. "It's over," she said, her voice rough but filled with finality. Daniel blinked, his mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what had just happened. The storm was gone. The obelisk had gone silent, its pulsations now a mere memory. The Kelkor were nowhere to be seen, vanquished, or perhaps simply no longer necessary. The world had been saved, but at a cost. Kelra took a step forward, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "We've saved the planet," she said quietly. "We've saved my people. But—" She paused, her voice breaking. "You had to let me go." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I couldn't have saved you any other way." "No," Kelra whispered. "I know." The world around them was still. The clearing bathed in the soft light of the rising sun. It was the first time Daniel had seen this world without the threat of destruction looming over it. For the first time, it felt peaceful, as though the land itself had exhaled, finally free from the weight of the curse that had bound it for centuries. Kelra knelt beside him, her expression no longer one of command, but of something softer, more human, and for a long moment they sat together, the silence stretching between them, filled with all that had been lost and all that had been saved. It was over. The mysteries had unraveled, the conflicts resolved. The cost had been high, but the world, Kaelra's world, had survived. And so had he. But as the sun rose higher, Daniel knew that this was only the beginning. They would rebuild, together, one step at a time. The planet had been saved, but its future was still uncertain, and it was in their hands now, both of theirs. The dawn had come.